From a studio high above the clouds of the Okanagan Valley, this is the Cannabis Podcast. Exploring the world of Canadian cannabis culture, one toke at a time. Now, here's your host and bud tender, Gary Johnston.
And let me welcome you back to the Cannabis Podcast. Thanks for coming back. I so appreciate the fact that you're here. Perhaps this is your very first visit. Well, if it is, an especially warm welcome for you. Over the next 30 or 40 minutes, we are going to be talking about a plant that I absolutely love and am very passionate about, and that is cannabis. Perhaps you have a similar interest. Before we get too far, let me remind you this program is intended for those 19 or older in your jurisdiction and is intended primarily for entertainment and perhaps educational purposes. You should always consume your cannabis responsibly. And in this episode, we're going to look at an old stereotype that I'm glad to say has fallen from grace, the lazy stoner stereotype. We're also going to take a look at Colorado, where someone has done some research and similar concerns exist about the high THC values in that state. I'm going to review a glossary of cannabis terms just to refresh ourselves with some things that perhaps we need to review. And do you have any idea where the share of your province's revenue from cannabis has gone? Well, not many people do, so we're going to be looking at that as well. And sales in BC last quarter, they dropped a little bit, cooled a little bit. On Cultivar Corner, it's back to Vancouver Island. We are looking at Victoria Cannabis and their Indica-dominant G-Wagon. All of that and more on episode 155 of the Cannabis Podcast. And because the day that this is being published is Mother's Day, let me say Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers in the audience. And you can pass it along to your mother as well if you like. It's a very special day. I hope you are being treated well, and I hope you are treating your mother well today. Happy Mother's Day. And as always, thank you so much for being a listener. I truly appreciate the fact that you are here. And I want to thank my supporters, Jordana, Keith, and Jordan at buymeacoffee.com/cannabispodcast. If you feel so inclined and you like what you hear, you can go there too and buy me a doobie. And just a reminder that everything that goes through Buy Me a Coffee, 1% of that goes to climate change research. And I also want to thank my patrons at Patreon. Tony, Roger, Rob, Gage, Lloyd, and Mitchell. Thank you, gentlemen. I so appreciate your support each and every time. And you can find the links to all of those at the very top right on the show page. And for our first story of the day, it's off to theounce.ca. This is one special to The Ounce, and this was written by Don Campbell. Cannabis users might not be as lazy and unmotivated as popular stereotypes suggest, according to new research from the University of Toronto. In a study published in the Journal of Social, Psychological, and Personality Science, U of T researchers found that regular cannabis use had minimal effects on motivation and willpower, and that getting high was associated with more positive emotions and fewer negative ones. The research aimed to take an objective look at the effects of recreational cannabis on the daily lives of chronic users, says Michael Inslicht, a professor in the Department of Psychology at U of T Scarborough, who led the study. There is a stereotype that chronic cannabis users are somehow lazy or unproductive, says Inslicht, who is cross-appointed to the Rotman School of Management. We found that's not the case. Their behaviors might change a bit in the moment while they're high, but our evidence shows they are not lazy or lacking motivation at all. For the study, scientists surveyed 260 chronic cannabis users, defined as those who use cannabis at least 3 times a week, 5 times per day over the course of a week. Participants received notifications through an app asking if they were high, and were then prompted to answer questionnaires that assessed their emotional state, motivational levels, and willpower and self-regulation. Inslicht says the most interesting finding relates to motivation, with participants found to be just as willing and motivated to exert effort in completing a task when high compared to when sober. Past research has shown mixed results when it comes to chronic cannabis use and motivation, with Inslicht noting much of it relied on limited experimental designs that didn't account for differences between cannabis users and non-users, including variations in personality, mental health, or use of other psychoactive substances. He says this study accounted for those pre-existing differences and also looked at chronic cannabis use while participants were actively high. The researchers did find that being high was associated with lower levels of self-regulation, an important trait for being able to accomplish tasks. Specifically, chronic users reported being more impulsive, less thoughtful, and less orderly. These things can detract someone from getting stuff done. But we didn't find it made them less hardworking, responsible, or able to focus, says Inslicht, who runs the Work and Play Lab, which does research on self-control, motivation, and empathy, as well as social media, digital devices, and recreational cannabis use. Chronic cannabis users were also found to experience a boost in positive emotions such as awe and gratitude when they were high, and a reduction in some negative emotions such as fear and anxiety. However, more chronic users were found to experience more negative emotions while high as well as while sober. The study also found no evidence of a weed hangover the day after cannabis use. Inslick notes that studying the effects of daily cannabis use was difficult in the past due to its legal status, and that most scholarships on the topic focused on negative impacts in an effort to curb use. Now that cannabis is legal in Canada, however, Inslick says he expects there will be more research focusing on both positive effects and risks. The cannabis literature historically tended to focus a lot on the negative medical consequences of chronic use, says Inslick. Part of the motivation for this study is to take a neutral, clear-eyed approach to see how cannabis affects chronic users in their everyday lives. He adds the study isn't an endorsement of heavy cannabis use, pointing out there is plenty of research highlighting its risks, especially among adolescents. Rather, he points to Statistics Canada data showing that nearly 1 in 10 adult Canadians are regular cannabis users, and they come from all walks of life. Cannabis is also the fourth most used recreational drug after caffeine, alcohol, and tobacco. But despite its increased legal and social acceptance, relatively little is known about the everyday experiences of regular users. Our data suggests that you can be hardworking, motivated, and a chronic cannabis user at the same time. The study received funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And that was written by Don Campbell. And that's some excellent research out of the University of Toronto. Hey, we've always known that we're not just lazy stoners. Sometimes we're lazy when we're high.
From the cannabis-infused studio in the clouds, this is the Cannabis Podcast.
And a story from Stratcan.com that was contributed. The biggest challenge facing Canadian cannabis companies entering the export business is getting certified under Good Agriculture Collection Practice, GACP, regulations, and the Good Manufacturing Practice, GMP guidelines for experts, tell Stratcan. Receiving the clinical and pharmaceutical seal of approval is required by countries importing cannabis and is different from the Good Product Practices, the GPP regulation, that governs domestic sales, the experts explained. Many companies underestimate the time and the expense involved in getting the certifications, according to Atiya Farouz, CEO and founder of consultancy firm AgCan. We give them a timeline of 12 to 18 months, and we give them a price point in the six figures, and they're usually taken aback, Farouz said about their clients. Australia, Germany, Israel, Argentina, the UK, and the US are the biggest importers of Canadian cannabis, according to Health Canada data from October of 2023. Germany legalized the possession of 25 grams of cannabis for recreational use and 3 homegrown plants by people over the age of 18 on April 1. The country will allow adults to join non-profit cannabis clubs to purchase a maximum of 25 grams per day on July 1. According to Jeff Abbott, head of product development at producer Northern Green Canada, Germany has the most significant regulatory hurdles of any cannabis importing nation. It can take years to validate your process and qualify your products for market entry, and that's not including things like stability, Abbott said, explaining that Germany's quality control and assurance program includes cultivar-specific stability standards to provide shelf life data. While Northern Green scales up a new genetic formula, they must undertake a country-specific stability run on a cultivar using 2 or 3 batches over 3 months, giving the product a 6-month shelf life. Companies must then receive individual export permits per country, per amount of flower, and per potency from Health Canada, Abbott continued, and those must correspond with import permits from the country of destination. Jeff Black, CEO of producer Glasshouse Botanics, said export permits for Germany last for 3 months, while export permits for Israel are for 6 months. In that time, they're trying to decide, do they still want it or not, Black said of importing companies. Permits from Health Canada are now typically given out 5 weeks after the application and used to take only 3 weeks to process, according to Kayla Mann, Chief Revenue and Financial Officer at organic grower Habitat Life. All the experts Stratcan spoke with said those fluctuations were primarily due to ebbs and flows in scheduled shipments and were not indicative of drop-offs and surges in demand. But Farouz pointed out that Australia changed its regulatory requirements for importing cannabis to the stricter GMP practices from GACP regulations as of July 1st. I think that might have been part of the drop-off that you saw, she said. Israel launched an anti-dumping investigation into Canadian cannabis exporters on January 18th of this year and specifically addressed 10 different Canadian cannabis producers. Experts said they hadn't seen any impacts on exports from the investigation and were divided on whether or not dumping was a market-wide issue. The standards set by the government of Israel have allowed a more lenient approval for international producers when compared to countries such as Germany or New Zealand, which require EU or GMP certification. Black & Mann said they were unaware of a dumping problem in the Canadian cannabis export market. The surplus of cannabis in 2023 is now gone, Black said, and the dumping allegations may be tied to cannabis from Canada being cheaper. The difficulty of exporting cannabis, it is not an easy task. And I came across this article on the ounce.ca the other day, and I thought, you know what? It may be a good time to get back to the process. Let's get back and talk about some terms. Because if you are new to the cannabis industry, some of these terms may not be available to you. And for those who have been in the industry for years, some of these may need a bit more clarification. So thanks to staff at the ounce.ca. If it feels like cannabis has its own language, that's because it does. Here's a glossary of cannabis terms you may come across while navigating weed. Bud or flower. The bud or flower of the mature cannabis plant is the main part of the plant that's smoked, vaped, or processed, as it contains the highest concentration of cannabinoids in the plant, including THC and CBD. Cannabinoid. Groups of structurally related chemical compounds in the cannabis plant, some of which bind and interact with cannabinoid receptors distributed throughout the body. Cannabinoids are what cause the plant's effects. CBD. Cannabidiol, known as CBD, is one of dozens of molecules called cannabinoids found in the cannabis plant. CBD has become known for its medical benefits. Unlike THC, CBD has no psychoactive effects. Concentrate. Highly potent forms of cannabis made by extracting cannabinoids from cannabis plants. There are a number of different concentrates, including oil, rosin, hash, wax, and shatter, that are made by pressing or processing cannabis. Concentrates are often vaped, dabbed, or smoked. Crunk. Now this is a new one for me. A cross between chronic and drunk. It means to be high and drunk at the same time. Never heard that term before. Dab or dabbing. A dab is a small amount of concentrate, like hash oil or shatter. Consuming it is called dabbing, which is done with a heat and a rig to make vapor, which is inhaled. Edible. Food that's infused with cannabis. Extraction. The process of making concentrate. Some extraction methods use chemicals such as alcohol, carbon dioxide, and butane. Greening out. Consuming too much weed is called greening out, which comes from the booze term blacking out. It's associated with different symptoms for different people. Nausea, dizziness, sweats, confusion, not feeling like you can move. Hemp. A plant in the same species as cannabis, but with very low levels of THC. Hemp plants have been used for centuries to make rope, cloth, and paper. Hash. A form of concentrate made from compressed trichomes, aka keef. Illicit cannabis. Also known as gray market weed. Illicit cannabis is obtained from a source that's not regulated. Keef. Dust that falls from dried flower, which is actually trichomes. Larf. Possibly one of the most fun words to say out loud. Larf is small, immature buds that haven't reached their full potential. Often larvae buds are from the bottom of the plant where there wasn't enough light. Legacy. In cannabis, legacy refers to a person or company that worked in weed before legalization. And that's why you'll find legacy being used in a whole bunch of different names at the moment. Minor cannabinoids. Aside from the big two, THC and CBD, there are numerous minor cannabinoids that come from the cannabis plant. Some have their own distinct effects. Minor cannabinoids are increasingly being featured in products including CBG, CBN, and CBC. Rosin. Cannabis extract that's made without using solvents or chemicals, usually produced through pressure and heat. Shatter. It looks like caramel or toffee that could be shattered like glass. It's a brittle concentrate used in dabbing. Strain or cultivar. Through years of crossbreeding, cannabis plants come in an increasingly wide variety. In the legal cannabis market, the name is not usually the strain, but the strain is increasingly listed on the label. Examples include Northern Lights, OG Kush, Green Crack, etc. Terpenes. Terpenes are aromatic metabolites found in the oils of all plants. In cannabis, research has shown that they help give different strains their smell, taste, and effect. THC. The abbreviation for tetrahydrocannabinol. A crystalline compound that is the main active ingredient of cannabis and responsible for the psychoactive and psychotropic effects. It's also known as delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. And trichomes. These are the glands or hairs on a cannabis plant that carry the majority of the THC and CBD in the plant. Viewed under a microscope, they look like water droplets. And that was, I think, a pretty efficient description of a lot of cannabis terms. Any new that you would like to add?
THC, CBD, terpene profiles, what's in me? Oh, please explain to me. Cultivar Corner, Cultivar Corner, oh yeah. Cultivar Corner, please explain this stuff to me.
On Cultivar Corner today. We're going back to Victoria Cannabis Company, and we have done some weed from them before. Today, this is G-Wagon. This is Georgia Pie and Swish. That's Z-W-I-S-H. Swish and Georgia Pie. THC sitting at 34.05%. The total terp sitting at 2.32. G-Wagon is the product. And, savory notes on this one. This is a really unique one. So savory, lime, corn chip, and sweet gas, and chunky. And definitely some savory notes on that. Really an interesting aroma profile. As you pull that out, let me get my jeweler's loupe out. Let's take a peek at this G-Wagon and see what we got on these. I ended up with 3 buds in my 3.5. Alrighty, I got myself a new jeweler's loupe. The other one was fading. The light wasn't working so well. Oh, my. Oh, such savory notes on that. Really wide and vast trichome fields as you look in that. And as I break the buds up, you get much more of those savory notes. So they're saying savory and lime, definitely picking up some savory. And as you crush the buds, not a surprise that there's even more of those aromas. And you bring your fingers. Oh, wow. Really savory. That's a very unique situation. So what do we got on this guy? We had talked about the terps. No, we talked about the THC at 34.05. We have not hit the terps yet, and it looks like we have some unique terpenes on this guy. Although, once again, if I look on what they say on the web, so the top terps for G-Wagon on the web, sitting at limonene, germacrine B, which I've never heard of before, and farnesene. I look on my package, and I get a slightly different version. So my total terps on my package, 2.32. My dominant terpenes are limonene, trans-caryophyllene, and beta-myrcene, which makes sense. This is an indica dominant. And I'm busting up those buds. Oh, and those savory. I can't describe it any other way. It really is a savory note. It's like I want to pop that into my mouth and have a nice savory snack. So they're saying lime, corn chip, and sweet gas in terms of the aromas that are coming. It's a savory and lime. A stunning release by Umami Seeds. G-Wagon is a cross of Georgia Pie and Swish. This indica-leaning bruiser grows in chunky box-like clusters of bright silver resinous flowers. This is Victoria Cannabis Company's first release of a very unique flavor profile. This flower is straight up savory and reminds one of lime, corn chips, and rotten gas. With over 3% total terpenes and flowers coming in over 30%, she'll soon be a staple in every discerning enthusiast must-have list. So Umami Seeds, now that makes sense because I came across umami in terms of a taste sensation probably about 3 or 4 episodes ago. Was not aware of that word, had not heard of that word before. I got an explanation that it is a savory taste, like sweet, sour, savory, and umami. So seeds provided by Umami. The grower is Taylor King, and G-Wagon is the weed. And I'm getting my joint rolled, and we'll get some loaded up in my Arizer Air Max. So we get a taste of it. So micro-cultivation, a 9-week flowering time, 6-week cold cured. And that's about all the information I can get for you on G-Wagon. Now I think it may be time that we sample some G-Wagon from Victoria Cannabis. I got enough here to put it into my Air Max. Really enjoying everything that I have tried so far from Victoria Cannabis. So it's time. Let's give it a try. G-Wagon from Victoria Cannabis. Okay, so savory aromas, certainly when we're sticking our nose in the bag. And the aromas that they say, aromas and flavor, savory, lime, corn chips. For whatever reason, I'm not picking up the corn chips, but I'm definitely getting those savory notes. Really a nice flavor. We're waiting for my Air Max to get up to temperature, and then we'll take a taste of this without any of the smoke and combustion, and let's just see what the vapor tastes like. Hang dried, hand trimmed, And it goes for a fairly long period of time. So let's give a try to the Air Max. Oh, so much more of those flavor profiles. There's more of that savory notes. Some of that sour gas coming through as well. Oh, that is a really unique taste profile. One of the more unique ones I've had of recent. And now my endocannabinoid system is starting to fire off on some of these. And in typical Cultivar Corner fashion, this is the first smoke of the day. I find that's really when I get the best bang for my buck. And so far, it's feeling pretty good on my endocannabinoid system. Let's give you the story of Victoria Cannabis. Well, the business has only been operating since the fall of 2020. The Victoria Cannabis Company is guided by a team whose commitment to excellence in the industry has roots reaching as far back as 25 years. The legacy of this experience informs and augments our every decision, resulting in a tangible level of quality that makes our products shine. The Victoria Cannabis Company is comprised of 2 micro-cultivation facilities and 1 nursery. This fosters our ability to enrich the cannabis market with the finest quality product that our skilled team can yield. We grow traditional quality BC craft cannabis on Vancouver Island in the territory of the Songhees Nations. And there's the story of Victoria Cannabis. And the other story of it is what's going into my endocannabinoid system now, a combination of vapor and from the joint. And G-Wagon, which is a cross of Georgia Pie and Zwish. And it's working towards my endocannabinoid system now. It's coming in not gangbusters. But I do need to let it roll around and fly. Really love this unique taste out of this guy. That savory notes on cannabis is really something quite unique and kind of gives me a interesting feeling as it smokes in terms of the endocannabinoid system and the high. Not getting a lot of happy eyes right now, but I got a lot of euphoria going on. My body relaxation is pretty heavy as of this point. My THC on this guy is about 34.5. Is that what they said? 34.05. So it's going to climb up there a little bit. And I'm definitely getting high. No doubt about that. And I always find it interesting which weed gives me the happy eyes and which weed doesn't. This one definitely getting that euphoria, nice body relaxation. Feeling pretty darn good. And as always, wondering whether he should keep smoking to carry on and see if this dives into a deeper consciousness, or whether he should just put it away and enjoy what we got. And that's probably something that I need to do more of. We'll take one more hit out of the Air Max. So this one is not knocking me over on the floor. But I guess maybe I don't always want to get knocked over on the floor. This one is definitely giving me high, a little bit of the happy eyes coming in now, but definitely well established in the euphoria, nice body stone. Pleasant in the head. I'm not really too confused. I don't feel there's a cloud coming over my emotions. I'm just kind of high. I just love smoking weed. I just love getting high, and I love trying new stuff. Victoria Cannabis G-Wagon, umami is the taste, the savory taste. I think I'm going to have a rather savory day. And as I am wont to do after the cannabis has had a chance to roll around in my endocannabinoid system to be absorbed by my CB1 and CB2 receptors, and they've done a lot more absorbing. Comes on a lot stronger as you sit with it, which is always nice with a real nice indica because it just comes on stronger. You kind of establish yourself in your seat or your chair where you are, and it just gets kind of deeper. I'm not quite into couch yet, but it's definitely coming on a lot stronger. I'm really enjoying the feel of G-Wagon.
Sharing stories about good weed while trying good weed. This is the Cannabis Podcast.
And we're going to stratcan.com for our next story, and this was written by David Brown. When the federal, provincial, and territorial governments discussed the federal excise tax rate in the lead-up to legalization in 2017, provinces successfully lobbied to receive 75% of the excise tax collected by the federal government. The argument made by the provinces was that the supposed cost of legalization would be borne by themselves, including the territories and municipalities. This cost was not only related to the implementation and management of their own licensing and regulations, but also the added cost of law enforcement and impacts on public health and public health resources. Provinces, and to a degree municipalities, said legalization would mean greater expenses and therefore the bulk of the excise tax collected by the federal government should go back to them. Carol James, then BC's finance minister, upon the signing of the agreement in 2017 said, "We negotiated an agreement for BC that means the majority of cannabis revenue will flow to the provinces, so we can invest in programs to keep people safe and remove the criminal element from cannabis. But where those dollars have gone isn't always very clear. While some provinces like Ontario, Quebec, and to a degree Alberta have been open about how that money has been spent or allocated, other provinces or territories appear less open. BC's municipalities, for example, have been asking for years now where those tax dollars have gone. The same issue is playing out in New Brunswick and Saskatchewan. Of course, how much has legalization actually cost municipalities and provinces? While there were concerns of increased policing costs or additional public health and safety concerns, more than 5 years in now, we see these concerns were largely unfounded. Increased policing is highly questionable since there are fewer illegal and unlicensed stores now than before legalization, with many voluntarily closing rather than facing enforcement action. So there is less of a need for police to deal with possession or consumption. There have been increased incidents of police detecting cannabis when testing drivers. However, it's difficult to say if this is due to an increase in use or simply because it's now easier for law enforcement to detect use. Increased costs to municipalities are difficult as well. Most cities have spent at least some time and effort developing new bylaws for cannabis stores, and some have taken extra time vetting any potential applicants, all of which add to their costs. However, these cities also generally charge hefty application fees that cover at least a portion of these costs. In terms of cost for the provinces, public health and safety issues were seen as one of the significant added costs of legalization. However, it's difficult to say there have been many, if any, real safety concerns for the public with legalization. Public health concerns in relation to long-term impacts of cannabis use, or more acute issues like emergency room visits, are a legitimate and difficult to quantify cost. Canada has seen an increase in people, especially young people, requiring medical assistance due to cannabis use, a cost that impacts provinces and the federal government's healthcare spending. Although it can be difficult to determine if these costs are due to use from the legal or illegal markets, they do reflect real impacts on spending. In terms of public safety, though, the added societal costs have arguably been non-existent, with the recent expert panel on the Federal Cannabis Act noting in their report the significant decrease in policing efforts and arrests or charges since legalization. In 2023, the previous Manitoba government repealed the 6% social responsibility fee they charged retailers, going so far as admitting that they had not spent the money as intended, and that the social cost of legalization had been exaggerated. Despite being a relatively low fee, this alone amounted to millions of dollars the government had collected or expected to collect from the program. Although the provincial government had argued that legalization would cost the government money, they admitted that these fears were unfounded, and that in fact they had been using these funds for entirely different purposes. How many other provinces are doing the same? How much of the federal tax revenue that is making its way to the provinces is just being used to fill government coffers, especially as we enter a period of increased government spending and a challenging overall economic environment? More importantly, how can the industry better take into account where those dollars are going in their efforts to address the issue of overtaxation? While lobbying Ottawa has its place, changing how much of that revenue is coming in will force Ottawa to first get all the provinces to agree, or risk alienating them by cutting them out of tens or even hundreds of millions in annual revenue. And that's an interesting question, is where are all those revenues going in our various provinces? They are collecting 75% of that excise tax, and that has been a lot of money. It would be nice to know where that money is going.
Exploring the world of Canadian cannabis culture, one toke at a time. This is the Cannabis Podcast.
And we're picking up the next story from the ounce.ca, and it is contributed by Anna Schwab from The Conversation. Canadian cannabis companies have been accused of inflating THC numbers by picking or enhancing samples to deliver higher results and choosing favorable labs. In Colorado, one researcher is finding similar results. Cannabis flower sold in Colorado claims to contain much more tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, than it actually does, according to my findings published in the peer-reviewed journal PLOS ONE. Accurate THC reporting is a linchpin for medical patients, recreational consumers, and the overall integrity of the cannabis industry. Medical and recreational flower is generally the same. The difference is in testing requirements, price, taxes, and purchase limits. Misleading potency information can disrupt medical dosages, misguide recreational users, and erode trust in an industry striving for legitimacy. Consumers often associate higher THC levels in cannabis flower with superior quality, potentially leading to overpayment for products that may not meet their expectations. This misconception can also create incentives for cultivators, testing labs and dispensaries to generate higher THC numbers, whether through cultivation techniques or through testing fraud. Additionally, testing for toxins, pesticides, and total yeast and mold can also fall victim to falsification. Recent reports reveal instances where labs in New York and other states have passed products that should have failed. This casts doubt on the credibility of the broader testing processes in place. I gathered a total of 23 cannabis flower samples from 10 dispensaries across the northern Colorado Front Range, which includes Denver, Fort Collins, and Garden City. The samples encompass 12 strains, including Indica, sativa, and hybrid types, and varied in reported THC values. Some had ranges, such as 12.8% to 19.3% on the lower end, and 28 to 31.28% on the higher end, while others had single values such as 16.4 or 17.4. I sent the samples to a third-party testing lab that does high-performance liquid chromatography, or HPLC. HPLC is a method to separate, identify, and quantify components and mixtures based on their chemical properties. It is the most commonly used method in cannabis testing to analyze cannabinoids and detect contaminants. This can ensure product potency, safety, and quality. Approximately 70% of the labels reported THC percentages more than 15% higher than what was quantified through the lab. Among the 23 flower samples analyzed, 18 displayed lower THC levels than reported, with 16 falling below 15% of the stated value, 13 falling below 30% of the reported THC, and 3 samples falling below half of the reported THC. Notably, only 1 sample had slightly higher THC than reported, and 4 were within the reported range. The observed disparity was not due to aging. When THC ages and degrades, it turns into cannabinol or CBN, and CBN was not found in measurable amounts in any of the samples, however, and further testing indicated stable THC levels over time. A fundamental query looms large. With advancements in cultivation techniques, including lighting, nutrients, and selective breeding, has the potency of cannabis flower generally surged over the past 15 years? THC levels averaged 9.75% back in 2009, based on testing of DEAC's cannabis flower. Today, levels reportedly surpass 35%, though they're not as common as consumers have been led to believe. DEAC's cannabis flower averaged 13.8% in 2019, which is closer to my observed mean of 14.9% than the reported mean of my samples, which was 20 to 24%. We also do not know who is responsible for the misinformation regarding inflated THC potency for cannabis flower. It could be cultivators or dispensaries selecting the best flowers to test. Sampling guidelines differ by state, but all require a random sample from the entire batch. But there is little to no oversight when it comes to enforcing these guidelines. It could also be a lab fraud. Facilities might manipulate the testing process or doctor numbers on the certificate of analysis to ensure repeat business from producers and distributors who set prices based on THC content or to generate new customers. I believe a critical next step is for the cannabis industry to educate consumers on how to make more informed choices by looking beyond mere THC percentages. People generally do not shop for wine or beer based on alcohol content. Instead of focusing on THC content, a novice cannabis consumer might consider brands that are reputable or strains that have an aroma or flavor profile they enjoy. Eventually, they may move on to find a favorite breeder or grower or a trusted dispensary that employs a knowledgeable bud tender. Cannabis consumers, industry players, and the public must also continue to advocate for better oversight in sampling and testing to ensure safety, transparency, and accountability, and to foster trust from the cannabis community. And that article again written by Anna Schwab from The Conversation. And what do you think? What do you think about the THC levels? I know I've talked to growers, and yes, they have gotten better. The whole science of building up that THC has gotten better over time. Do we need to be questioning the THC values? It's a question that we're all still asking, and I don't think anyone has the final and full answer. And a story from David Brown at Strachan on cannabis sales cooling off a little bit in BC for the second quarter. Cannabis sales declined in BC in the first 3 months of 2024 compared to the last 3 months of 2023, but still showed year-over-year growth. Sales through the province's direct delivery program also shrank for the second quarter in a row from their highest point in Q2 of 2023. Wholesale grams of cannabis sold in BC from the LDB to retailers in January, February, and March of 2024 were up almost 21% compared to the same period in 2023. Wholesale sales dollars were also up 10.3% compared to the previous year. All figures are for wholesale sales through the LDB, including direct delivery. Now, despite this year-over-year increase, wholesale dollars on cannabis sales through the liquor distribution branch, the LDB, declined slightly in the most recent quarter compared to the two previous quarters. Wholesale cannabis sales were $132 million in Q4 2023, down from $136 million in Q3 and $137 in Q2. The decline is due to the continued lower cost of cannabis, again down in the most recent quarter to a new low of $3.92 for all cannabis and $3.21 for dried flower. The number of retail stores in the province increased again in the most recent quarter, up to 501, a net increase of 5 from the previous 3 months at the end of 2023. Dried flower and pre-rolls are still the majority of sales in dollars sold. However, for several quarters in a row now, inhalable extracts, including products like vape pens, extracts, and infused pre-rolls, have been higher than dried flower sales, at 35% of wholesale sales in Q4 of 2023. Sales of 3.5 gram SKUs of dried flower declined year over year. They declined from the previous quarter as well. And despite these year-over-year gains, sales of 7 gram SKUs declined slightly from the previous quarter, though 14 gram SKUs remained stable from Q3 of 2023 and 28 gram SKUs increased slightly. Edibles were 5.4% of total sales in Q4, cannabis beverages 1.9%, and topicals 0.5%. Disposable vape pens continue to show significant market growth, with $2.4 million in sales in Q4, showing a 91.9% year-over-year increase and a 72.2% increase in units sold. The province sold about 10,000 more disposable vape pens in Q4 compared to Q3. Vape cartridge sales showed modest increases both year-over-year and compared to Q3. Sales through BC's direct delivery program, which allows certain BC producers to ship products directly to retailers rather than going through the province's central distribution warehouse, showed the second consecutive decline in wholesales and grams sold. There were 602,000 grams sold through this distribution model in Q4. This is down from 702,000 in Q3. Bucking the trend in overall sales, though, the price per gram of dry cannabis flower sold through direct delivery increased to $4.42 a gram compared to $3.93 per gram in Q3 and $4.18 per gram in Q4 of 2022. Flower and pre-rolls are the majority of sales in this sales channel by sales and units sold. Direct delivery sales of edibles and beverages showed a 90% increase year over year, with a fourth quarterly decline of some 2,705 units sold in Q4 compared to 3,439 in Q3. Dried flower sales increased slightly from Q3, but were lower than in previous quarters. No plants were sold through direct delivery in the first 3 months of 2024, compared to 102 sold in the first 3 months of 2022. Sales declining a little bit in some markets, and perhaps remaining relatively stagnant in others. I guess it's retail, isn't it? Well, as always, we like to end with a joke to give you a smile on your face as you finish off this episode, and here they come. These are from toughmama.com. I just bought some shoes from my drug dealer. I don't know what he laced them with, but I've been tripping all day. What's the difference between a drunk and a stoner? The drunk will run a stop sign. The stoner will wait for it to turn green. Why were the welder and stoner such good friends? They both love to spark up joints. Confucius says, he who smokes weed on toilet is high on pot. And that's a good groaner to finish with. That is it for episode 155 of the Cannabis Podcast.
From the Cannabis-infused studio, high above the Okanagan Valley, this was the Cannabis Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To check out more great cannabis podcasts, go to podconnects.com. Here's a preview of one of our other shows.
Hey there, my name is Leah Babrudi, and I'm the founder and host of Cannachicks Podcast, where I discuss cannabis, psychedelics, and other natural medicines. I not only interview people who use them as treatment for different conditions, but also the entrepreneurs who share their knowledge on how they built their businesses. If this sounds interesting to you, give my show a listen. I'm sure you'll learn something that'll surprise you.